We should have turned back. We should have fucking listened to the locals. But no, Marco insisted on pressing forward. We were camping in the vast, open plains of Venezuela, a place that seemed endless, where the horizon bled into a sky full of stars, and the wind whispered through the dry grass. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a week of hiking, camping, and drinking under the southern constellations. We'd been warned, of course. The old man at the dusty roadside inn had looked us over with weary eyes, his voice cracking as he spoke. El Silbón roams the llanos, he'd said, his gnarled hands clutching a rosary. If you hear the whistle, you must pray. Because if it sounds close, he is far away. And if it sounds far, he's right behind you. Marco had laughed, tossing back another shot of a Guardiant. Sounds like a load of shit to me. The old man's gaze darkened. El Silbón punishes the arrogant, the wicked, and the foolish. Maybe we should have taken the warning seriously, but we were cocky, drunk on adventure and cheap liquor. We shrugged it off and set out the next morning, pushing deep into the plains. By the fourth night, the novelty had worn off. The heat was unbearable even after sundown, and the isolation felt oppressive. Our campfire flickered weakly, and the wind hissed through the dry grass like a snake slithering just out of sight. Marco was busy fiddling with the camp stove, cursing when he nearly burned his hand. Elena, our group's self-proclaimed realist, was leaning against her backpack, taking swigs from a flask. Raul, the youngest and most superstitious of us, sat hunched over, rubbing the carved wooden amulet his grandmother had given him for protection. "It's too quiet," Raul muttered, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames. His eyes scanned the darkness, as if expecting something to leap out at us. "Relax, man," Marco scoffed. "We are in the middle of nowhere. What the hell could possibly be out there?" Raul didn't answer, just kept fiddling with his amulet, his knuckles white. The wind shifted, and that's when I heard it. A whistle. Low, slow, and haunting. The kind of whistle that sends a cold sliver of fear down your spine. It carried across the plains, rising and falling like a song from some forgotten world. I froze, the beer can halfway to my lips. "Did you hear that?" Elena rolled her eyes. "Jesus, not you too. It's probably the wind or some." The whistle came again, clearer this time. A long, drawn-out note that seemed to stretch into eternity. The hairs on my arms stood up, and Raul's eyes widened in pure terror. "El Silbón," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's him." Marco groaned, tossing down the camp stove lid. "Oh, come on. It's just a legend." The whistle sounded again, this time from a different direction, distant yet somehow too close. My pulse hammered in my throat, and I remembered what the old man had said, "If it sounds far, he's near. If it sounds near, he's far away." "We need to go," Raul said, his voice trembling. "Now. Stop being a fucking baby," Marco snapped, but even he sounded unnerved. The air felt heavy, thick with something that wasn't natural. The fire guttered, and a strange, metallic smell drifted on the wind. It was the smell of rot, of old blood, and something else I couldn't place, something almost sweet. Then we heard it. A soft rustling, like footsteps dragging through the grass. "Who's there?" Marco shouted, spinning around, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Nothing. But the footsteps continued, circling our camp, slow and deliberate. My heart raced, and I grabbed the hunting knife I'd brought, my hands slick with sweat. The whistle came again, closer this time, making my ears ring. The sound was so mournful, so full of sorrow and rage that I felt a sob catch in my throat. Elena's face had gone pale. "I don't like this," she whispered. The rustling stopped. Silence pressed in around us, so thick it felt suffocating. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. He was tall, impossibly tall, his gaunt frame swaying like a puppet on broken strings. His face was obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but his eyes glowed with a sickly, yellow light, and his mouth twisted into a grin that made my blood freeze. A burlap sack hung over his bony shoulder, stained with something dark and wet. And the smell of rot and decay grew stronger, making me gag. "Holy shit," Marco whispered, backing up so fast he tripped over a rock and fell hard onto his ass. The figure took a step forward, dragging the sack behind him. It made a wet, thudding sound, as if something heavy was inside, something that dripped and oozed onto the cracked earth. "Pray," Raoul said, his voice cracking. "Pray, or he'll take you." The figure tilted his head, as if amused. He lifted a skeletal hand, then the whistle came again, piercing and high-pitched, like the scream of a dying animal. Elena clamped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. Marco scrambled to his feet, grabbing the machete we'd used to clear brush earlier. "Stay the fuck away," he shouted, swinging wildly. The figure didn't even flinch. Instead, he moved faster than anything that size should be able to, closing the distance in a heartbeat. His hand shot out, and his fingers wrapped around Marco's throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "Marco!" Elena screamed. Marco's eyes bulged, and he clawed at the figure's grip, his face turning purple. The tall man leaned in, his rotten breath steaming in the cool night air, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then, with a sickening crunch, he snapped Marco's neck and tossed his body aside like a rag doll. The sack on his shoulder twitched, and I thought I heard something inside it, something crying, like a child. We ran. We didn't think, didn't grab our gear, just ran, the whistle echoing behind us, mocking us. The grass tore at my legs, and I could hear Elena sobbing, Raoul muttering prayers under his breath. But the footsteps followed, dragging, relentless. Raoul tripped, and I skidded to a stop, turning back to help him. But the figure was already there, standing over Raoul, his yellow eyes glowing with unholy light. "Please," Raoul begged, clutching his amulet. "Please, no." The figure raised the sack, and I saw it clearly then, blood leaking from the seams, the fabric bulging with something that moved inside. He swung it down onto Raoul, and the impact made a wet, crunching sound. Raoul's prayers cut off abruptly, replaced by silence. "Run!" Elena screamed, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her with me. My lungs burned, and the whistle grew louder, filling the night, drowning out my own heartbeat. We didn't stop until we collapsed near a dirt road, our bodies broken and exhausted. The whistle had finally stopped, but the damage was done. Marco and Raoul were gone, taken by the spirit that punished the arrogant and the foolish. We were found the next morning, delirious and covered in blood. No one believed our story. They called it a tragedy, said we must have gotten lost, that our friends had been killed by wild animals. But Elena and I know the truth. Because some nights, when the wind is right, I still hear the whistle.